In '89, it was kind of a big news year for the Vikings, as they seemed to have the talent, and they were looking for the final piece to make a drive to the Super Bowl, and they traded for Herschel Walker, and it was believed at the time that was the final piece for a Viking Super Bowl team. From your recollection, what was the impact of the team on the trade for Herschel Walker, and was it disruptive to the team? And we always wondered why he was not, or he didn't appear to be, fully integrated into the offense. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, as a team, and for myself, I think we all were, probably reading into it and maybe not knowing what may be, if there is a missing piece to get us to the championship, which was the goal of every team in the NFL to get to the Super Bowl. And when they made that trade, I don't think anybody, whether it was the team ownership, coaches, or the players, I think understood what type of benefit that was going to provide the Cowboys going forward. I don't think anybody was. I think everybody was optimistic about what Herschel was going to bring to the table. It's funny because, his first play, from scrimmage was right behind me and Tim Irwin where a shoe went flying off. I don't know if you remember that, but that was his first play, and I think he ran, I don't know how many yards, 30, 40 yards, I think, on his first carry.
Yeah, he told us that. He sold you and I on it. I don't know whether or not he has sold Jerry Burns on it.
Second time in as many weeks that Walker has faced Green Bay. He did so last week in a Cowboy uniform. Here's the carry.
And I think everybody went, whoa, this is what we were hoping for, okay? And then I think from that point forward, it was good. It just wasn't great. I don't think, no team in the NFL is, the quarterback position, I think, can have a tremendous impact on your success. But a running back, and don't get me wrong, Herschel contributed in a number of ways, whether it was special teams or, as a running back or whatever it was. But I don't know if, we caught him at a time in his career where that, and then, like you said, integrating him into the system, maybe it wasn't a perfect marriage. And because of that, maybe he couldn't, accomplish what I think they were looking for him to do. Don't get me wrong. I mean, we were excited to have him. I think we only took it, in the NFL, we were kind of taking it, one game at a time, 1 year at a time. But again, I don't think any of us were really considering, what kind of future repercussions it may have by giving away that many draft picks for one guy and giving up a couple players, for one guy, hoping that would be the answer. And, sadly, it did end up being that way.
General Manager Mike Glenn continued to try to find the missing piece there in those years. It seemed like it was about 1990 or 91. He sent you on a team outward bound style retreat, high ropes and truss falls and things like that. What do you recall about the experience, and was it really helpful to improve the team unity?
Well, you can ask any of us that went on that trip to New Mexico. It was fun. It was interesting. You're talking about professional National Football League players coming out, and there was some tests out there that were pretty fun. But I don't think the kumbaya scenario of that really was going to carry over. I think maybe in a corporate atmosphere, now and have been in corporate America, I could see that probably filtering down or out in maybe a better way. It was fun, don't get me wrong. There was definitely some fun. The O-line had a lot of fun. It's a memory, and it's a time I'll never forget, because I could think of numerous stories and some fun things we did there. And there was a lot of obstacle courses. There was a truss scenario, where you'd be standing somewhere and you'd have to fall back and all the guys would have to catch you. There was that kind of truss scenario. There was fear, where you had to do something that, you had fear about, and different guys, didn't want to walk across a wire or a thin piece of wood, go down a zip line over a river, which that was pretty extreme. Right. And there were certain guys that had to overcome fear. But, as far as at that level, and you never saw us go back again because I don't think we had a very good year following that. And because of that, that's why I think we never returned. If we would have gone to that and we would have had a great season and made the playoffs or even made it to the Super Bowl, I guarantee you we would have been on the calendar for that place for the next 5 or 10 years,
They'd still be going to the game today.
Yeah, because it would have been almost, at that point, it would have almost been like superstition, like we have to go back. It's tradition, But by chance, it didn't work. We didn't have a good season. And I really don't know if that would have made the difference or not. I really don't think so. But it was a lot of fun. Don't get me wrong.
And with all the talent that you had on the teams you played with in 88 through 91 under Jerry Burns, why do you believe they struggled so much to win on the field?
I don't know. That's a hard one to put your finger on. It always comes down to the player, player personnel. The players you have on the field can make things happen. Leadership is a key. I think on both sides of the ball, and even on special teams. I think if you have somebody on the field who's a leader, in addition to the leadership that's provided to you by the coaching staff on the sideline and the head coach, that's a great combination. Because then the players on the field who are younger or who are, following those leaders, they're motivated and they're not going to give anything but their best. And so when they're on the field, there's somebody out there right behind them, and on the sideline, there's somebody preparing them all throughout the week to be their best and to win, on Sunday. So I think that's a big key. A big key. I think to success in the NFL or probably at any level in football or even probably any sport.
When we talked to Darren Nelson recently, he said, when he tried to put his finger on it, he said the only thing he could really point to was the fact there was a lot of a lack of continuity at the quarterback position, whether it be because of injury or competition. He said it was literally a revolving door from 87 through 90.
Yeah, actually, you know what? That may even be a better point because, if you do look at some of the great teams over the years, the quarterback position can have a tremendous impact on the success of a team and on the continued success of the team. So to constantly be looking for the right guy, and there were a couple good guys I think that came through. The Vikings while I was there that went on to have successful careers even beyond their Viking days or with other teams. Maybe they just weren't ready. They just didn't have the experience yet, or maybe they got injured. Whatever the reason was, that's true. We did have almost a different guy every year behind us on the line, and I think that was a piece of it. And then also, again, I come down to the scheme and the play calling, and anybody can you can armchair quarterback that. Everybody can. It's easy to analyze something after it's already been completed. But I know there's always been and always will be scrutiny on the D line or on the defense and on the offensive side of the ball as far as play calling and down and distance, and was that the right decision, all those types of things.
Obviously, those struggles evolved in 92 to a new head coach in Dennis Green, and that was where you had your knee injury, which really had you sitting out the entire year. What was that like for you as you watched a new coaching staff come in, the team have a great measure of success his first year? How difficult was that for you to be forced to watch from the sidelines?
Well, the biggest part of that is that in camp, I was running at tackle. In fact, I was primarily focused on, I ran right guard, but I was running right tackle. And I don't know if they were looking for me to replace, Tim Irwin, whenever his day came, whether he got injured or whether he retired. And I was having a great camp. At right tackle, nobody could get around me. I don't know if I gave up a sack in camp. I was probably in my best shape ever, and sad to say that, we go into camp, and end up blowing my knee in preseason. Because at the time, it was kind of like Brian Habib had come in and we were kind of battling at right guard, but they had me playing at right tackle a tremendous amount during camp. And like I said, camp was going great until the knee went out. I was done for the year, and I had to sit back and watch, the success of that season, which was very good. And again, I think the system, the offensive scheme and system and play calling that year, I thought was very good. And it was kind of it actually was almost deja vu. When Darryl Rogers left and John Cooper came in college, it was a 180 as far as the system, the plays, the focus, the detail on some of the stuff we were doing. And wow, we had a 3-year run, of bowl games. And then when Burnsy retired and, Dennis came in with Jack Burns and that whole system, again, a totally different system, and it worked. And everybody got it, and they had confidence in it, and it seemed to, lead to a lot of success.
Obviously, in '93, you came back from the injury and regained your starting spot, and you helped the Vikings to another playoff berth in '93. Your quarterback at the time was Jim McMahon. What type of a leader was he, and how did he interact with the linemen?
Jim's a character. There's no doubt about it, but he had a special bond always with the offensive linemen. We had heard about it, actually, with some of the guys in Chicago. They said that, hey, Jim's going to take his locker. He's got his locker right in the middle of all the old linemen. Same with us. He had his locker right over by all the old linemen. And I don't know if it was a matter of just he felt comfortable or he felt like, that's my protection. I'm only as good as those guys can provide me, protection or holes for our running backs to run through. But it was a fun year. Again, goes back to what Darren was saying, and what I agreed with is the fact that, we had another new quarterback come in. Everybody had, I can only speak for myself, but I think everybody had a respect level for Jim because of his accomplishments and how well and how many years he had put into the league. It's fun to play for a guy like that who's confident. He's been there. He's done it. He's seasoned. He kind of was able to put things in perspective. We had some fun. There's no doubt about it. But he was the kind of guy who, once you got in the huddle, it was all business. We had a lot of fun outside in the locker room or in the meetings or, on the plane or bus or we're traveling or whatever it was. But he was a guy that, it was kind of like turn the switch on when it came to football. That's what he was all about. And we did well that year. Again, I think we ended up, losing to the Giants, at the Meadowlands that year. And I'll tell you what, Jim took a beating that year. I know that at left tackle, I think that was the year Everett Lindsey. I think Everett filled in that year, and I think we opened with the Raiders. Whew, Jim was getting killed. He got killed. I got killed a couple times by the pile actually getting pushed all the way over, even to the right side, out in opening day, out in Oakland that year. And I know Jim took some beatings, but he was the kind of guy that got up and shook it off and just kind of went on and played forward.
Well, obviously, during your time in Minnesota, beyond Jim McMahon, you played with other quarterbacks like Tommy Kramer and Wade Wilson, Rich Gannon, and Sean Salisbury. Of that group, including McMahon, was there one that seemed to be a better natural leader than the others?
I don't know, because, all of them were kind of different. Wade, when I came in, I think he was just Pro Bowled it, and Randall and I came in as rookies. I think our rookie year, I think he went to the Pro Bowl. I'm trying to remember. So he was kind of at a point where he might have been at maybe a peak in his career. Rich Gannon, Rich may not have just been ready. I think Rich hurt his knee. Definitely you could see potential, but again, I think it was just a matter of kind of getting more time. He needed to apprentice more, I think, at the position to see everything I think they wanted him to see and to be able to be confident in what he was doing. It was catching different guys at different points in their careers, whether they had a number of years or whether they had, only a few years. So it was really a matter of what was their capability with the skill set and experience they had at the time, to provide the team that year to hopefully get us as far as we could go. The key too is, it was health, it was injuries, was the guy there and could he be there every week? And if not, the guy number 2 or number 3 guy had to step in there and, either be able to take it over for the rest of the season or at least fill in the gap while the guy was healing. But hard to say. You know, it was really, you know, all of them had different tools. They're all kind of built differently. And it was really hard to judge because it was such a short tenure for each of those guys, you know, behind us as the call maker.
During your NFL playing career, was there any game that you played in that had the similar college rivalry feel, like an Arizona State-Arizona? Was there a game such as Green Bay, Minnesota, or even when you were in Pittsburgh against, you know, a Cleveland or somebody like that, that had that type of rivalry, or does it just not match to the college level?
No, I think it matches to the college level, without a doubt. You know, whether it was Arizona State and, you know, University of Arizona. What was interesting is that I thought in college you kind of had one major rivalry. You know, at Arizona State it was simple for us because it was typically always the last game. I mean, all the Pac-10 teams, you know, you always had a rivalry because of the history of all the years you played against them and the history of maybe the bowl games you played in. But what's interesting is sometimes in the NFL, there's some teams where it's still just the one, but it seems like in the Central Division, you know, seemed like there was more than one. You know, you always had a really, you know, Green Bay was big. There's no doubt that Green Bay was big. But for some reason, you know, Chicago always seemed big. Depending whether we were on the road or at home, that always seemed big. Detroit, you know, depending on how they were doing, you know, maybe not as exciting because, you know, maybe there wasn't as much on the line sometimes when we were playing them, and sometimes maybe there was, you know, because every team always has a couple good years in there. But, you know, I would say that Green Bay definitely probably does still stand out. With the Steelers, it was interesting. The Browns were really, I thought the Browns were a big rival, of course, because they're just a couple hours up the street. It's interesting now, though, with the Steelers, you know, with the team having left and gone to Baltimore and Cleveland getting the team again, the big one now is Baltimore.
Right.
I don't know where that's based from, or if that's because it's really just it's the old Browns having moved to another city. It's still a rivalry with the Browns. They just haven't been that good recently. And when, you know, good teams playing a good team, it's always more exciting. But for some reason, you know, somehow that's gravitated to become a very, very big rivalry. I know the Cowboys and Redskins, I think that's always been a rivalry. So there's always one that seems to be primary. But it does seem to be, you know, every game's a big game typically, especially when there's more on the line.
You know, oftentimes, you know, offensive linemen will prefer a typical running back style of running, whether it's because they follow the blocks or, you know, they make your job easier. Was there a particular running back when you were with the Vikings that you preferred to block for, and if so, why?
You know, I don't know. My job was the same no matter who was behind us. You know, of course we could maybe get a little more excited, you know, as far as, and, you know, again, you know, running back is a tough position and staying healthy is difficult, you know, so you go from, you know, from Darren, you know, with Herschel, Robert Smith, number of different fullbacks, you know, that we had. But, you know, for me, I always kind of approached it as, you know, a job. And it was interesting because most fans, you know, and it's a game of entertainment. There's no doubt about it. Football is entertaining. But, you know, as far as a job, you know, whether you're going to compare it to corporate America or a professional sports team, it's your job. And, you know, it's every year's your last year. You know, that's kind of what I was told when I first came in with some guys that had played, you know, before me. And do whatever you have to do to try to get another year. And the key to that is, you know, they grade you out, you know, and it has to be consistent. So grading out and being consistent was probably the key to longevity. And, you know, as far as who we were blocking for, you know, my job was the same. It was the same play. I still had to block or pass protect against the same player. And the better I did it, I think the longer my career would last.
You concluded your career with the Bengals, where you started, you know, the final 11 games of the year for them. And in fact, the very last game you played was against the Vikings, to where you guys knocked the Vikings out with a 27-24 win. Do you have any memories of that game, and did it seem a fitting conclusion to your career to play the team you'd been drafted by?
Oh yeah, definitely, without a doubt. I mean, it was really, and at the time, I really, my frame of mind at the time was not that this was my last game of my career. I really, the following year, trained and worked to prepare for the next season, hoping that I would get a chance to play another year or two, if possible. But yeah, I think it was fitting when I look back now that I was going head to head against Johnny Randall all day long. And I have to say, I think I was frustrating him a little bit because I went against him so many times in practice in all those years I was in Minnesota with him that, I wasn't, I guess, maybe intimidated by John, because at that point he was still going on to play even more years. But having spent so much time against him and had done so much one-on-one, so when it came to pass protection, and because of my speed and my ability to react quickly, I think I played pretty well against him that day, and the game went pretty well. And it was interesting, to end playing, my career against the team I came into the league playing for. And then after that, when the day came where I made the decision to retire, I actually did contact the team, and Jeff Diamond allowed me to retire a Viking, and they actually generated a contract that I signed, and then basically, I guess I signed it and then retired. Yeah. So I actually retired a Viking, having played for, the Steelers and Bengals both for a year, but having grown up in Minnesota, and having spent the majority of my career in Minnesota, have the majority of my memories in Minnesota, I thought it was a tremendous, opportunity, for me to retire a Viking and for them to allow me to do so.
The current squad, I know being in Pittsburgh, you don't get a chance to follow the Vikings as much anymore, but they've actually struggled over the last several years to find consistent play at the offensive guard position. In your mind, what are the keys to successful guard play in the NFL today based on what you see?
It's such a physical league. Again, it's not an exaggeration that it's gotten bigger, faster, stronger. And the key to that really is the other piece of it, which is, the mental part of the game. Whether it's intimidation or your intelligence. We used to have a coach always say, know your craft. Know your craft. And if you know your craft, you'll be okay, because you'll know it'll be instinctive to you what to do on the play. Everybody talks about making calls on the line of scrimmage, and how everybody sees the defensive line shifting and the linebackers. And, there's a purpose and reason behind that. One, them getting into the right set for whatever defensive front they want to run against the offensive line, but it's also to mess the line and the calls up. So you have to have that instinctive knowledge that the guy on both sides of me, since I played guard the majority of my career, that if we didn't have a chance to verbally, shout out the call, I knew he knew what I knew that he was going to get the right guy, and I was confident, vice versa, that he knew I was going to get the right guy. So there's a lot of things that play into it like that, and that a lot of that stuff comes back for me as a lot of fun.
Adrian Peterson obviously now is the headliner in Minnesota, and last year he barely missed surpassing Eric Dickerson's single-season rushing record when he finished with 2,097 yards. And this year, he said he's going to push for 2,500 yards. Have you ever wondered what it would have been like for you to block for a guy like Adrian Peterson?
Oh, it would have been great. It would have been great. I was along with everybody else this season, and I don't even know if it was just Viking fans. I know they were first in line, but I think there were a lot of other people, watching that. I think it's such, I guess, a unique moment that everybody wants to be a part of, whether you're at the game or on TV, to see the record broke, if he would have. He got so close and overcame that injury and all the other things, but that is just a tremendous amount of fortitude. I know what it's like to try to come back from an injury, and it's difficult. It's a matter of, building confidence and, is there a chance that it'll ever happen again? And I believe, I don't even know if he was wearing a brace or not. I think he was, but some of those guys come back and don't even wear a brace. I don't understand how they can do that. But, that was a lot of fun to follow. And, hey, I always follow, the team. And, in a general sense, it's hard, like I said, without living in the same city, to see, the newspaper or the local news or even the radio, because they're tuned in to their team there in town. So I have to basically rely on what I can see from where I am now, and maybe having some conversations with some guys that live close in the area.
On the flip side, when we turn back to the college ranks, I know your son Kyle is following your footsteps. He's going to be a sophomore right guard, I believe, at the University of Michigan. Did you have any influence on his choice of college, and what advice have you given him on the position?
Well, as far as choice of college, in summary, I told him I'd be happy to see him play at the college level if he wanted to, and wherever he chose to play, he needed to own it. It was his choice. It was not a matter of my choice or telling him where I thought he should play. You know, if I was selfish, I'd have told him to go play at Pitt. You know, University of Pittsburgh's right in my backyard. It's in town. Hey, he could have stayed close to home, or I could have had him, or I would have told him, say, hey, go back to Arizona State and play there. It'd be kind of neat, have a legacy. You know, I played there, you'd play there. I didn't do any of that. I basically just said, Kyle, you choose. And I kind of wanted to allow him to kind of go through the process himself. Neither of my parents went to college. Neither of my parents played team sports. So how did I end up playing team sports? You know, I just gravitated towards it. It was presented to me, and I had to make some decisions. So I left the same thing up to him. And I said, I don't care where you go. I said, but you have to be conscious that if it's far away, I probably won't be able to come to all the games. If it's closer in this region, I'd probably be able to come to all the games. So maybe he factored that into his decision-making process. Of course, I was part of it, and I would give him my opinion, and I think the choice he made was great. And, you know, going into his second year, he'll be a redshirt freshman this year. As of right now, he's the starting right guard. So I'm sure he's got some goals and aspirations, and, you know, he may or may not tell me what those are. He might, you know, he does on some, and some I think he keeps to himself to see if he can accomplish them. As far as him playing, I try to give him, when he was in high school, I didn't want to confuse him because he had an offensive line coach who actually played at West Virginia at his high school, and for me to tell him something and then for the coach to tell him something different, I needed him to be 100% confident in whatever that coach at that high school was telling him. I didn't want to confuse him. Now, we're at the next level. Now I might show him a couple tricks of the trade. You know, there's some things with your hands and your head, and some things I kind of like, I plant a couple seeds in his head, and I try to get him to think about them. Now that he'll be playing, he redshirted last year, I'll be able to see what he's doing. I'll watch, you know, his footwork, I'll watch his positioning, I'll watch what he's doing, and I want to do it because I want to help him. You know, I want him to be as successful as possible. So, you know, I'm going to try to draw from my experiences and help him as much as I can.
Well, it'd be great news. We have one person individually on our website, an enormous Michigan fan, so he's following your son pretty closely, so it's great to know he's progressing well.
Yeah, we're looking forward to it. This will be an exciting year. You know, they've got Notre Dame, Ohio State, Michigan State at home this year, so those are three big games, and not to say all of them aren't big games, but, you know, those are the ones that, you know, I guess people tend to have, you know, I guess an interest in, even if they're not, you know, just a Wolverine or a Michigan fan. You know, they just kind of like to see how those teams do against each other every year.
Sure. We wish him good fortune this year. The last part of our interview, Todd, is simply a rapid-fire session where I'll give you one word or a phrase, and what we're looking for you in return is one word or sentence in response. Does that sound okay?
Sure.
Okay. First, Tommy Kramer.
Good old boy.
Darren Nelson.
Dedicated.
Gary Zimmerman.
Ooh. Yeah, I got a bunch of them that come to mind because I know Gary so well and played with him for so long. Intelligent.
Okay. Pass blocking or run blocking?
Randall McDaniel.
Jerry Burns.
I got to do a little side note on Jerry Burns.
Yeah.
Didn't know he was a Michigan Wolverine. He was on three conference championship teams when he was there in the late 40s, early 50s.
Wasn't he a quarterback?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But interesting. I got a chance to talk to him a couple years ago and asked him about that. But Jerry Burns. Fun.
Okay. Reggie White.
Dominant.
Dennis Green.
Focused.
Keith Millard.
Fast.
Okay. John Randall.
Randall. I know what I was saying. I'm trying to find the right word. Never stopped.
Okay. A high motor.
That's what I was looking for.
All right. The Green Bay
I
Packers.
was like, what's the right word for that?
The Green Bay Packers.
Memories.
Okay. Final one is the Metrodome.
Home. Well, what's funny is that when you said that, I was thinking like, I mean, there's a lot of words I could use for the Green Bay Packers and for the Metrodome. For the Metrodome, for me, it's it's home because I feel at home, in the state of Minnesota and having grown up there for a number of years. So I guess that's the right word. I was going to say old because when we came up for Randall's Ring of Honor, and we went to the stadium, for the game, and we sat actually down in the corner of the field. I couldn't believe, had not been there for a number of years and really never gone to a game as a fan. But, as you exited the game, you'd walk across the hall to get over to the lounge, and it felt like history. You know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of history in that place. And there is in every stadium that's ever been, demolished or, leveled to put in the new one. There's always a lot of history. But it was so funny, you felt like you were going back in time.
Yeah.
And you almost could feel like, like for me, it was funny because I felt like, I was back in the 80s or something walking around in there,
I think that's what most fans feel like, and that's why they're excited about the new stadium coming in 2016, a little bit more modern, a little bit wider concourses, and gives that new feel.
Well, that's the NFL, too. You have to keep building and growing or maintaining at least the fan base. And, even the roof, I noticed, I said to my wife, I go, God, this ceiling's really low.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? When I walked around up there, I was like, I feel real taller. These ceilings are really low. It was it was interesting, but, there's such great memories in that place. I mean, so I could have used the word memories because, coming out of there and hearing the horn and, all the stuff, I mean, it was just tradition, that was probably even a better word, was probably, tradition.
Well, I think the extra words we got were real valuable for the fans here. And Todd, that's the sum total of the questions that we had for you today. And we really appreciate you taking the time to share your memories with the Viking fans. And wanted to ask in closing, were there any thoughts you might have about the Minnesota Vikings?
No, other than, I wish them the best. I have a lot of fun watching the teams or team, whether it's the Vikings or any team that if, somebody I played with is coaching or now, maybe they're even in a management position. I like to see friends of mine do well. But, I do look forward to this season with the Vikings. And I look forward to seeing if, Adrian Peterson can hold to his word. And, he makes and breaks that record. That's great. If he doesn't, I still wish him and the team all my best.
Well, again, Todd, thanks for joining VikeFans.com, and we hope we can continue to check back with you in the future, and also hope you'll be wearing purple soon and cheering for the Vikings in the Super Bowl.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, Tom.
All right, Todd.